Hello, greetings, everybody. I'm just letting people in. Thank you for patiently coming into the room here. I see Sean, I see Brittany. Just waiting for our other presenter. Oh, sorry, just a quick question. Sean, can you hear me at all? All right, perfect. All right, we're just getting organized. Bear with us. Hi, Brittany, I see you joined as well. Brittany, can you hear me okay as well? Just give me a thumbs up or say something in the chat. Oops. And I am forgetting to send the meeting link to our other guests here. So they're asking for that. Failure on my part. Well, Sean, that's a good question. First of all, we got to kind of establish what everyone's expertise level is. But what we were hoping to cover tonight was the Git flow workflow. Are you familiar with this at all?
Good night. No, I am not.
Hey, Brittany. Not really. Okay, excellent. So this will be pretty educational this evening. So our one presenter, Chris, who I hope will be joining us shortly. This is Emilie joining us now. She'll be helping to facilitate. We're going to walk through how professional developers save their code, share their code, collaborate with others, their code. We're going to cover the fundamental building blocks, and Chris has got a whole presentation that he was going to do, and if he needs assistance, I'm more than happy to jump in. But yeah, we're going to start with that this evening. We're just going to cover the GitHub workflow, and then we're hoping to build on that at our next meeting. And so we're just going to keep building each of these meetings on top of each other. So if you missed something in this meeting, it's okay. We are recording, so hopefully people can go back and view at a leisurely pace. Hopefully I won't have to edit and cut too much stuff. I can just post as is. But yeah, that's the goal of this evening. So that's the first lesson we're going to do tonight. Then we may just do a little bit of ice breaking, show and tell. If somebody's working on anything cool, we'll cover that. And then finally, we might dip into a coding challenge tonight, depending how awake everybody is. I know it was a long week for me, so if everyone wants to stick around, we can tackle a coding challenge together. And Chris is going to show us a nice collaborative tool to do that. And who knows? Who knows? Either it'll be a success or a complete learning experience, right? It's a win-win. So we're going to walk away with something. So I am just trying to confirm if Chris is still around. I'm going to make you a co-host, Emilie, if you don't mind. That way you can let people in if I miss anybody.
All good.
Okay, thank you so much. I have to remember to unmute myself. They always flash that message, unmute yourself as you start talking. So I guess my question goes to our guests here. Have you guys installed, I'm just wondering, are you guys working on Mac or Windows? Okay, so I got one Windows and one Mac. Cool. All right. I was worried somebody was going to say Linux. I'll be like, whoa, we got some power users here. Okay, we got a nice spectrum. I'm actually on a Mac myself right now. Emilie, what are you on? Are you on Windows? Windows? Okay. All right, so we got two Macs, two Windows. I think Chris, who will be joining us, he's on a Mac as well. But it doesn't matter what you're running. What I want everyone to do in the next 10 minutes or so. Yes, I believe she is. I believe she's muted. I want you to Google up and see if you can download VS Code. If you haven't already have it installed, I want you to get it down. If you have it, good. You can just let me know that. And then the other thing, while we're waiting for our presenter to show up, I want you to venture on over to GitHub and start the sign up process. If you already have a GitHub account, perfect, it'll save us some time. But if you don't have a GitHub account, I want you to sign up for that. They're pretty good. Usually they'll have the Google button or Facebook, whatever the case may be. Make sure I have my things up and running. I'm just going to restart that. Okay. Still no Chris. He's making me sweat. It's going to make me do all the talking. That's fine. We can do an icebreaker meanwhile. Okay. Yeah, icebreakers. So I'll go ahead. I'll just do some yammering here, and then you guys can follow if you feel comfortable enough. So I'm Paul Gamble. My day job is actually working with ZOS mainframes for the federal government. I started with Department of National Defense. Now I'm working with Shared Services Canada. So most of my job is just looking at green screens all day and dealing with legacy code. And as a result, since I graduated from Georgian College in a computer programming program, that was in 2003. And a lot has changed since 2003. When I was in college, Visual Basic 6 was kind of the go-to, and then people were getting excited about Flash and Java. And so a lot has changed in the development world. So rather than going back to school, I was trying to find a boot camp or something to help me to get my skills back up. And that's when I came across freeCodeCamp. So if you guys haven't checked out freeCodeCamp, I highly encourage to go over there. Also sign up for that. And it was a nice refresher. They start with different levels. Like if you haven't coded a thing in your life, they teach you web development right from scratch. So they start with HTML and JavaScript and then on and on and on. And just by participating with freeCodeCamp and volunteering some of my time during Hacktoberfest, I started to level up my skills. I didn't have to go back to school to learn all this extra technology. I just had to play around. So they were also looking for people to start up local study groups. So that's when I decided to self-taught, amazing, Sean. That's when I started up the study group. We started at the Painswick Library. We did a few meetings. Emily, she hosted one of the meetings. I was unable to attend. And now we're trying to start up this meetup on a monthly basis. So that's where we're at. That's where I'm at. Brittany, what about yourself? Are you school taught, self-taught, or are you just starting your journey?
Okay, so I guess you could say school taught. I currently attend the University of the West Indies Mona campus in Jamaica.
Okay,
And
wow.
I am a first year biomedical engineering student. However, my coding teacher, she has been constantly telling us to go on the internet, check out different conferences that you guys can join, learn more coding, because coding is, well, she goes on and on about coding. So I saw this event on, I think it was Eventbrite, and
Cool.
I just said, okay, I think I'm interested in to learn more.
Amazing. You have a very smart teacher. That's good. That's great. That's great. I'm glad you could join us. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to convince my niece, who's in high school right now, to get into coding, to anything. It's if you know a little bit of coding, because it's applicable to every industry, you'll be ahead of the crowd. As far as I personally am very biased about. And Sean, you're all self-taught, like you from the ground up. You just started learning Python. Sorry, I'm catching up on the chat here. All right, that's awesome. Yeah, just started. Perfect. Python is a great language. I actually, I don't know if you had a chance. I went to Pycon in Canada. They have a conference in Toronto. They had one in Montreal I went to, and then the last two they've had in Toronto. It's one of the cheaper conferences. I suspect it'll be virtual this year, I suspect, and I suspect it'll be affordable. So if you guys if I can plant that seed in your head, keep an eye on Pycon. Even as an electrician, we program something. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you can't get away from it. People think that I don't have to learn any of this coding or technology, and we can sign up for. How can we sign up for Pycon? I don't know if you could sign up. You could search pycon.ca, I think, and then they have one in the U.S. as well, pycon.com. There may be some more information. Sometimes they don't promote the event until a little bit closer. Are you gonna let them in, or am I gonna let them in? I gotta take the hands off the steering wheel. I don't wanna step on toes here.
Races with us.
Woo. You just wanted to make us sweat, eh, Chris? I was like, oh man. Oh, maybe he's still making me sweat.
Did you think I wasn't going to show up?
Yeah, I had like beads of sweat coming down. I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to pull out a presentation.
You might want to
He
consult
was about to
a doctor
cry,
about that
and I was
one.
like, "Don't cry, Paul. It's gonna be okay."
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Chris.
The main
Naismith, is
event.
that
Naismith. Yeah.
Naismith. All right. Do you need to get sorted for the next 5 minutes, Chris, or do you want to jump right into it?
I was gonna go fill up my water bottle. Besides that, quite honestly, I didn't prepare any slides. I didn't really prepare anything, just because it's all stuff that I hopefully know and do on a regular basis. So we'll see how it goes.
Even better. No, that's perfect.
Yeah, we'll do it.
Nobody
live.
wants to be. Yeah, nobody wants to be killed by PowerPoint. They want to see a pro walk them through. You know.
Yeah, stumble his way through. That's what everyone wants to see.
So we have a question.
And Sean, just to answer your question, yes, there pre-COVID there were meetups in person. It was at the Barrie Public Library. After COVID, I'm sure that Paul is intending to resume that, as well as maybe offering like online as well. That might be something that you could do. But I'm speaking for Paul.
Yeah, you know what? If we can get some buzz tonight and get more people, and if you guys are still interested in coming, I'll be more than happy to carry this on. Absolutely. I just want to mention, because Chris might be a little bit humble, but he was also organizing meetups at Georgian College here in Barrie. He has a meetup group called North OT, and I didn't understand the name of his group, but it was to promote technology north of Toronto, because a lot of the tech startups were flocking down to the city. And in Barrie, Brittany, I don't know if you know our geography all that well. It was a bit of a hike for us to go down to the city just to learn technology. So what Chris was trying to, thank you, Chris, for putting the link down there. If you guys want to click on that, he would get together these amazing lineups of keynote speakers. And at first I didn't know what to expect. And so I showed up to a few of these meetups, and some of these guys would just walk through a new framework. They'd be like, here, let me show you a new framework. And they would literally start coding an application in front of us. And we're like scribbling notes down like crazy, because it was mind blending. Some of the presentations they had, and he always left some time for Q&A. And it was a nice, smooth, almost TED Talk for people that were interested in learning new technology. You didn't have to apply all the things that were presented, but they definitely showed you what was possible. He even had a gentleman, and it's funny because he knew one of my friends that worked in the fintech industry. And so he presented his business, and they were trying to recruit, those that wanted a coding job. So it's, love those meetups. I can't wait till Chris starts North OT or whatever he feels like tackling in the future. But,
I'm glad that I have a hype man for North OT.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, man. I'll be your hype man. Absolutely. I enjoyed myself every time. I always had interesting questions for the presenters. Like, I thought they probably rolled their eyes, but okay, let's get into this. Before you showed up, Chris, I suggested they download VS Code. I don't know if everyone's installed that. I suggested they start up a GitHub account, but they can always do that after the fact. But the floor is yours, my man.
Cool. Are you wanting to record this by chance? I don't know if you record these. You're muted, by the way.
It's recorded.
It is. Oh, okay. Yep, you're pointing. Cool. All right. So hi, everyone. My name's Chris. To give you some backstory on who I am a senior front-end engineer at a company called Jane.com, which is a e-commerce store that's based out of Utah. Right now, only available in the States, but we'll be transitioning to Canada some point this year is the goal. I've been developing since about I was 11, but professionally for about the last 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years. I lose track because of COVID. And today I'm just going to be going over some helpful tips and tricks on how to use Git and GitHub effectively, especially in the world of COVID where everyone is remote. So online collaboration is a little more difficult than sometimes being able to talk about stuff in person. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing, let me share my screen. Let me create a new repo first. Actually, no, I'll share my screen. Just trying to make sure I share the correct screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Little thumbs up, cool. All right, so what I'm going to be showing today is the ability to create like a pull request and how to deal with stuff like merge conflicts, how to deal with online collaboration, just kind of in general, and some what I consider best practices, but will change depending on who you're working with and where you're working. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is creating a new repository so that we can throw all of our free CodeCamp stuff in there. So if you're not familiar with GitHub, I actually have the dark theme on right now, but it should be very similar. You can create a repository name if you're not familiar. I'm going to call it freeCodeCamp, and I'm going to Jan, what is it, the 30th today? 29th. And you have two options. You have the ability to choose public or private, depending on if you want other people to be able to see it, either as a allow everyone, or you can specify individual users to being able to look at it. So I'm going to go private just so that that way, for those of you that are wanting to see it, you can. You also have some additional stuff that you can do, which I'm going to ignore for all purposes right now. So I'm going to create it, and it will do its thing. And now we have a new repository that's created. So right now there's nothing in it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what's called cloning to my computer. And what a clone is GitHub is the source of truth. And we want to be able to take the files, in this case, an empty repository, and download it to our computer. So I am going to be opening up the terminal. If you're not as comfortable with the terminal, you can also use their GUI applications that are more interactive than using commands. But what is fairly common as developers is getting comfortable using the terminal. It is a little bit faster once you get used to it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder on my desktop. And it's actually no, I should just be able to clone it. Let's see what happens. It may or may not let me do it because of it being an empty repository. So I type in git clone and then the repo path. And you'll see that it clones it to my computer and it says that I have cloned an empty repository. So that's fine. I can go into that directory, and if I type in ls, you'll see that there's no files. But what we can do is we can create a file. So I'm going to say touch example.md. Apparently that one did not work. Paul, do you know the command just for creating a blank file on Windows?
No, I'm used to Mac.
Yeah, so am I. I'll just open it, open the folder, Explorer. There we go. So in here, I'm going to create a new text file that's called example. When I ls, you can see example.txt is there. So I'm going to open VS Code, which is my editor of choice. You can use whatever you want in order to do it.
Yeah, to answer your question, Chris, I'm going to put it in the chat. It's a cryptic one.
Of course it is. Okay, so let me try to take some stuff off screen that we're not going to be needing right now. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making a change to this file and say this is my first commit. And I can save that file. And in order to get these changes, this is an example of using a visual interface versus using the terminal. In specifically Visual Studio Code and others as well, there is a source control. So it's automatically detected that I'm using Git. And in here, I can actually see the changes for my files. If I click on it, on the right-hand side is my new changes, and on the right-hand side is the previous. So in here, I can click the little plus, which is called staging. Additionally, if you're using the terminal, you can just type git add, and you can either say the file name, which could be example.txt, or you can type git add dot, and that will just grab all of your files and stage them. So if I type in git status, you'll see these are the files that I have staged, which means that when I do a commit, those are the files that are saved for that change. And what committing does is it allows you to go backwards if you want. So I can type in git commit -m means that I want to attach a message to it. And I can say, I'm just going to say init for initialization. And right now, my local Git repository is not connected up to GitHub. So in order to do that, GitHub does have some commands that you can run. You can ignore the majority of these, but what you want to do is, actually, no, I think because I did a git clone, it should be good. If I just type in git push. Okay, so I did push up to master or main, whatever they call it now. And if I refresh, you'll see my new file example.txt is now on GitHub. So understanding both Git and GitHub, GitHub is a cloud version, cloud hosted of your files, whereas Git is just the local version of that. And GitHub doesn't know about your files until you do a git push. So effectively it's local until you do a git push, and then that will go up to GitHub or GitLab or any other sort of online Git host that you're using. So to do something that's a little bit more useful, typically you have, like maybe you have a large repository, maybe a small one, but people will do what is called branching. So you'll branch off of your main one, so that way you have all of your changes, and when you push up, people can compare your changes versus master, because in a lot of applications, master or main, whatever the main branch is, will do automatic deployments to, like maybe the website or go through some sort of pipeline, whereas local branches and name branches might not necessarily have that set up. So in order to branch off of master, you can type in git branch, or you can either, I actually don't ever do that. I just do git checkout -b, which is saying that I want to check out a new branch, and I can give it the name off of the current one. So in this case, I'm going to call it example. And you'll now see that I was switched to a branch called example. If I type in git status, it says the branch that I'm on, and it says that there's no files that have been changed. So if I change this and say if I change this file now, example.txt, and I say this was done on example branch, and I save that. And this time, instead of doing it I did it in here last time, I'm going to do it in VS Code this time. I can stage this, or I can click and see the differences. So it shows me the before and after. And I can stage that and give it a message. So showing changing file on different branch. And I can commit that. And in here somewhere should be push. So I can push my changes up to GitHub. It says that there's no upstream branch. Do you want to do that? And you can just click OK. Sure. And now when I go to GitHub, you'll notice if I refresh the repository right now, if I open up example.txt, my changes are not there. And the reason for this is it is in a different branch. So if I open this up, I can go to example, and you'll see this does contain my changes. And right now I have a pull request. Hey, look at that. Paul made an update to example.txt. So let's say I want to take my changes. Well, let's look at his first. What is he doing? Okay, so he's made a change. He's added all of this. And let's just say that we want to do my changes first. And then we'll work off of, actually, no, that's merge his. We say, yeah, that's good, but we'll create a pull request first. Update to include sample from example branch. So as you just saw a second ago there, GitHub allows you to being able to compare someone else's changes or your own changes. So in this case, this is a pull request. And what Paul has done is he has, I believe, did you fork it?
Yeah, I jumped ahead while you were doing, yeah.
Okay. So what Paul has done is he has essentially he's forked this, and then he's done a pull request back to my code with changes saying, hey, here's something that I did. So you can see here, here's his changes on the right and the previous again on the left, very similar to what we were seeing before. And from here, I can review those changes and I can either comment on it, I can approve it, or I can request changes. So this is really handy, again, if you're working in a distributed team. You can highlight specific lines if you want. You can click and drag down. And maybe we don't like the first 3 lines of his smiley. And we could leave a comment that's on this and saying, hey, can you change this? And I can start a review. And then once I am done all of my reviewing, I can then choose what I want. So I can just say that I'm requesting changes. And then that's it for now. So when Paul comes into this, Paul will, for one, get an email notification saying that I requested changes, and will also be able to see in GitHub that I've requested changes. The other thing is you can see on the right-hand menu here that there's a fair bit of controls for different things. You can see who is reviewing, or you can also set people up to review it. There's also assignees and labels. You'll see some things like bug. If something is a bug, you could label it as such. Or in this case, documentation, because we're updating a TXT file. So we'll just leave that as documentation for now. And again, you get the entire history down below. So now that we have done that, we can actually, instead of requesting those changes, oh, see, Paul's already on it. Paul's great. So we'll let Paul make those changes. Waiting on you now, Paul. No pressure. Also, if anyone has any questions about what we're doing, feel free to just put them in the chat, and either Emily or myself can address them, or Paul. Paul's too busy committing right now, though. So while Paul continues to work on his PR, we can go in and we can. Actually, no, I guess I should get yours merged first. Okay. So now we have a new updated example.txt. And when I go into files changed, it should say, you can see these new, is that what you added, Paul? Were those things there? Oh, hold on, let me click refresh. There we go. So Paul just straight out removed those lines. I say that's good to me. I can now approve that if I wanted to. Technically, I'm the owner of this, so I can do as I please. But I can now merge this pull request in. And when I click confirm, it will take Paul's changes and merge it in, and I can go to the code, commits right here. And you can see Paul updating and then me merging it in. So now we have a slight issue. Because we've now merged in Paul's changes, and technically that file has changed since before, we now have a merge conflict. And this happens from essentially when you checked out that file off of master, and then you made changes to it, and then someone else has made changes to it since you've made those changes. GitHub and Git is not smart enough, not that it's not smart enough, it's just not able to detect, which changes that it should keep and which changes it should discard. So you can see here, this is kind of what's going on. It doesn't know how to resolve it. So you can click resolve conflicts, and you can do this either inside of GitHub or you can do it in your editor, but it will show you kind of like a before and after of what's going on. So you can see example is saying what is happening in the example repo, and this is currently what is in main. So we can modify this to being whatever we want. So in this case, I'm going to take this and remove that. And you can see here now what the new updated with our changes merged together is, this is our first commit. This was done on the example branch, and Paul wants to place some code here with his smiley face. So what happens when more than one person submits changes? It depends. So you can have multiple people that do changes in a single pull request, but usually what is probably more common is people will have separate pull requests. So oftentimes, and this will change from workplace to workplace, but when you have a pull request, and if you have merge conflicts in your own pull request, you are responsible for resolving those merge conflicts. And oftentimes that is working with the other individual who worked on it. Sometimes like you might be working in two entirely different areas. Oh, sorry, a pull request. This is the ability to essentially have that visual difference between what is currently in the code base and what your changes are. So if we had another file that Paul had made, say he made example2.txt, if he worked solely in example2 and I worked solely in example.txt, we wouldn't have any conflicts because we're working in different files, and it is smart enough to being able to handle that. Whereas because Paul and I were both working over the same lines in the same file, it's not necessarily sure how to handle that. In this case, this is just a text file, so it's a little bit easier to figure it out. But imagine if we both declared variables and if statements, and it wouldn't know how to merge those two together. So we can mark this as resolved now and commit merge. So this is now handling the merge conflict. And then you can see that I can merge that pull request in. And then afterwards, you also can delete the branch so that it doesn't kind of hang around, but it's not a big deal. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a difference between what is on your computer for Git and what is on GitHub. So because I made all of these changes through GitHub, you'll notice if I type in git status, well, actually it says example is up to date, but if I check out main and type in git status, it should say that it's out of date. I'd have to do a git fetch. Okay. So those commands that I just ran. So git status is letting you know what is the current status. Git fetch, what it does is it consolidates with GitHub, saying like, hey, is there any new branches that were created? Is there any new updates that have happened? You know, kind of just fetch me everything that's changed. And depending on the editor that you use, it might automatically fetch for you. So now if I type in git status, you'll see it says that my branch is behind. And that's because locally, all I have is this part that says this is my first commit. So if I do a git pull instead of push, so now I'm pulling from GitHub, it will now download those changes to example.txt, which you will now see locally in my editor. And that's kind of like the bare bones of being able to work collaboratively with someone. Is essentially when you're a developer and you're writing code, you'll make some changes to some files, you'll push it up so that way your peers can review it and it can get merged in. And this is used for a bunch of different reasons. For one, it can be used to maintain like code quality, so that way people can look at not just like the type of code that you wrote, but the way that you wrote it, making sure that it's efficient. Some places it really just changes depending on the size of the company and what a pull request means to them. For example, at most companies that I've worked at, a pull request, if you have someone that's reviewing it, it doesn't mean that that person is signing off that it works. In some places, you know, you might have a QA team, quality assurance, for verifying that, yeah, the code that Chris wrote is solving this problem and it's good to go. But most places that I've worked at, especially when it is just other developers that are looking at that code, it's just a sign off. It's what we call like a code smell test. That, you know, it looks good to me. It works. You know, there's nothing inherently obvious that is going to be an issue. You know, you haven't injected a keylogger into the application, for example. But if we go to open source, which might be a little more extreme example, React, which is a library that I use, they have, this is an open source repository created by Facebook, and they have 173 pull requests. So in here, let's go to one that has some more comments. Let's see, maybe this one. I have no context to what any of this is going to be, so this could be a train wreck or maybe not. So in this case, this guy has changed 25 files with a single commit, and he kind of outlines what he's doing. And you can also react with emojis to stuff, which sounds maybe silly, but it has a huge benefit to being able to, you know, communities saying like, hey, this is hugely needed, let's get this in. And in this case, there's code Sandbox that automatically creates it, some robots, and Mark Erickson, who is a Redux maintainer, which is in the React ecosystem, is just saying, why are we using this and not this? And in this case, the guy said, hey, I was waiting for that, kind of explains his thought process. And it's this back and forth, right? Like that's exactly what a pull request is made for. It's for conversation about why you wrote something. Why did you write it this way? Why didn't you use this? Hey, would it be better to use this? And at the end of the day, like most places that I've worked at, it's never about opinion-based stuff. Like, hey, I think instead of using tabs, we should use spaces, or, you know, something like that. It's never really something that's opinion-based, although I'm sure it happens. But really, it's for something that is truly has a difference on the code base. So you can see there's a bunch of different things that go through here. And there's some other stuff that we could go over, but probably isn't as important. Stuff like checks and all that other sort of stuff that's a little bit more advanced. But I hope that is a good intro to using GitHub and Git.
Do you have any questions for Chris? I mean, I think, and I pasted a little link in there for GitHub, and they kind of walk through what Chris did. I have to say, any tutorial or course I did with GitHub, they would always walk through, okay, this is how you make a repo, this is how you commit, this is how you push, you pull. It was an eye-opener when I started working with other people, and maybe Chris can answer questions like that. But the biggest thing for me was the whole branching, forking from somebody's repo and then making another branch and playing around to your heart's content. And then when you make a pull request, to try to convince somebody to pull that code into their branch. I mean, Chris, do you got stories at work about that? Any difficulties merging other people's code, or did you find it difficult working with other people's code to all merge together, or is it just kind of part of the process?
Yeah, like there's definitely times where someone else has worked on, especially when it's a lot of new code and you're working on a lot of new stuff as well and you're trying to integrate it. But for the most part, I think Git handles a lot of it pretty well. There's not really many things that I'll have to do. In my case, the code base that I work on is fairly large, and there are multiple changes to master per day. So I will oftentimes have to, pull the latest from master or main and then merge it back into my local branch. And then that way, so when I go to push it up, it's not out of date and there's not any merge conflict. So I try to resolve those as quickly as possible, rather than waiting until you have 20, 30 potentially merge conflicts. I'd rather handle them as needed.
Perfect. That sounds good. Does anybody else have a question for Chris about GitHub setting up? If you want, Chris could do this right now. You could fork his repo and you could do a pull request. You could literally fork his repo, monkey around, try to do a push or a pull request and see if he approves it or not.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that I should maybe point out, and this is kind of like not an example, but like a comparison that people use for Git, is that Git kind of works like a time machine. And I didn't maybe explain this for people that aren't necessarily as familiar with it, but each one of these commits is like a point in time that we can always go back to. And that's where the value of Git and GitHub come into it. Again, GitHub is just purely the cloud hosted version of Git that kind of gives us like a GUI interface for managing pull requests and such. But when I was in school, and you kind of mentioned this, when you first start working with Git, you have people that say, oh, you should use Git. And you might be the only person that's working on a project and you don't see that value because you create a commit and you're like, oh, okay, I'm the only one that's committing to this. I'm always working in master. There's never a reason to branch off. But once you start working in a more collaborative environment with other people, Git really shines in that area. And then what I find is those flows where you branch off of master, I start implementing those flows into my own personal projects where I am the only person that's working on it. Because, and this happens more with like client work, you'll have a request that comes in, and let's say you're working on a website for someone and they say, hey, we want to implement a carousel on the home page. And you're like, okay, if you were working just off of the main branch, you would, all of a sudden do your commit, but someone might say, hey, can you also, before you put the carousel on the home page, can you do this other thing? And now you have files that are changed on your computer. And now you have to like figure out, oh, do I comment this out and all that sort of stuff. Whereas if you had just branched off a master, that can just sit in that branch and it can just wait there, ready to get merged in whenever you're ready. And then you can branch off again in order to do those new changes that get done first. So what is nice is, again, as I mentioned, each one of these commits can be checked out individually as a time machine. So let me show that really quick, and then I will answer that question, Emily. So right here, we have that commit from Paul. And I believe this will do the commit right when you did remove it. So if I copy this commit ID, I can type in git checkout. And instead of having a branch name, I can actually just use that commit. And if I type that in and go to the file, you'll see here my changes that were up here are no longer there. And I can go further back too. You know, I could go to the original one with Paul, where he still had those top 3 lines. So I can type in git checkout and then that commit ID. And when I go to the file, you know, I have those top 3 lines now. And this is nice because now if I wanted to have these 3 changes there, I can actually branch off of this. So let's type in git checkout E. I'm just going to call it example 2. I'm going to push this up. Thank you for sharing that, Paul. Oh. Failed to push some. Oh, why did it do that? All right, take that thing that it wants me to type. Okay, so now it should have been pushed up, I think. Oh, I guess it's, yeah, it's not going to do anything because that was from the past. But I could probably do, anyway, I will go to answering the question because I could probably do that. So you have a question for GitHub and ASP.NET. Not sure if I should, yeah, feel free to ask it.
Okay, so I am still a student and I do interactive media design. So I am building a web application in ASP.NET Visual Studio Enterprise, and I upload my file onto GitHub, and I've linked my web project to my local computer. So whatever changes is made, so that's good, that's perfect. But when it has to be done on GitHub, like on the cloud, so I need to change it. I kind of need to change it. The problem is it's blocked. So what I need to do every time is to go to command prompt and push it from command prompt instead of commit all on my ASP.NET. So do you know how to unblock that?
I'm not necessarily sure what you mean by the unblock.
So when I tried, for example, to push it from ASP.NET, it just tells me like I can't, because like it's linked to my C on my drive on my computer, and it's not linked to my GitHub repository. So like for me to do that, like I can push it, but I can't push it from ASP.NET. I need to push it like from command prompt. Like I need to do it manually. I can't do it by commit all.
Okay, I think I know what you're referring to, and essentially it depends on where your Git folder has been initialized. So
Yeah, okay.
if I open, in this case I'm on Windows, but it's very similar on Mac. You can see here in this folder, we have example, but there is a .git folder that's created here. And this is a hidden folder that I have turned on right now so that I can see it. And this is where all of the information about stuff has changed. So what might be happening is the project was initialized not in the right folder. So Visual Studio might not be picking up how to push to that project correctly because the project file where it opens it might be in a different location than where it was initialized. Gotcha. And unfortunately, that is probably something that is more specific, one, to your use case, and two, to a .NET project. So I don't, unfortunately, write .NET, or fortunately, I don't write .NET. Depends on who you ask. But unfortunately, it would be one of those things that I could help you most likely if I was looking at it like over your shoulder.
I know, I understand. Yeah. No, but I understand what you mean. Where like, it helped a lot. Thank you. And I just wanted to point out, like, I really like GitHub because I don't have a portfolio, and for anyone who's looking for co-op or anything during summer, whatever, sometimes people ask you for your GitHub link, and it was very, very helpful, like in showing people what I've done and what I haven't done. I would do it one at a time, but when you look back at it, you'll see like how many repositories you have and what are the different languages that you've done and different projects. And like, I would definitely recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, and that's something also to talk about is GitHub, especially for developers, is fairly common to be asked in interviews. And I don't want to necessarily say here that every job that you apply to is going to ask for your GitHub. Some places don't care. But what is fairly common is sometimes for your first job, you might be asked for a GitHub as a way of showcasing your ability to self-learn, especially, you know, a lot of people come out of, if you're either in a boot camp or in college, you might be having the exact same project as, 30, 50, 100 other peers who were in the same like cohort as you. So you're going to be coming out with potentially the exact same projects, and they might want to see like, what have you done in your own time? What kind of stuff have you learned? But I don't necessarily think that that is a requirement either. I think most places that I've applied to, there's only been one place that asked for my GitHub, and I don't even think they talked about it. They might not have even looked at it. They just asked for it. But GitHub is a really good tool where you can showcase your learnings, because technically each one of your commits is to solve a problem. And you can kind of document your way through your Git commits, what you're working on. Let me quickly see if there's something that I worked on recently. No, there's nothing good. I'm sorry. I was going to possibly see if there was an example that I could use, but there's nothing really that good. But yeah, it is, you can kind of almost think of it as a portfolio of your code, is what GitHub can be used for. But really at the end of the day, it's so that you can save your work, push it up. You can think of it almost as using GitHub as like Google Drive, where you upload your files to, because if your computer for whatever reason were to die and you need to get a new laptop, of course you can download all of that code right off of GitHub and have full access to it again. Does anyone else have any more questions?
I do. So if you wanted to showcase your projects to an employer, would it be best to deploy your application or website and link it to your website in order for an employer to see the projects you've done? Like you said, they don't bother, most of the time they don't bother to view your GitHub or don't care. Is that right?
Yeah, it definitely depends on what you're working on. So some people's work might not be able to be deployed. For example, let's say you're doing like server code that isn't visual. You might not be able to deploy that. So using GitHub would be a good example of working on something. But if you're working on anything that's, say, graphic, like I have right here is a project. It's a cookbook. And it's all front end facing. If I go to the domain right now, which is cookbook.naismith.dev, don't steal my recipes. But this is a visual way of me to go in. So I might make a portfolio site that links to this. I would highly recommend, if you have anything that can be deployed, to deploy it so that way someone can go to it and see it. Because most people, I think, are visual in the way that they interact with things. Most people probably aren't going to read your code and see how it is. Whereas if they can see, they'd be like, oh, this is kind of cool, and go in. And so this is something that I built just for my recipes. So you can click on it, go in, and you have all the instructions. So being able to do that, I think, is beneficial. And there's, of course, tons of free options for being able to deploy that code online, like Netlify or Heroku, if it's something that is more server-based.
I see.
Hopefully, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. It did. So as far as your GitHub account goes, not many employers care. I
wouldn't necessarily say that they don't care, but what they might want to see is, let's say this, if they wanted to look at it, it's better to just have it there and not have to, it's better to have it there and them not look at it than for them to want to see it and it's not there. But of course, like most applications that I use, like I mentioned, Heroku and Netlify, both of them allow you to connect to a GitHub account. So that way, when you push to the master branch, it will automatically recognize those new changes and deploy it for you.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense.
We might, if I can get Chris to show us, he actually showed us how to deploy a website using code Sandbox. So we could take a quick break now, or we could take a quick break in 15 minutes. I'll just ask real quickly, break now. I got to vote for a break now.
I'm cool.
Quick
Yeah.
break? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll do a quick break now. When we get back, if Chris is willing to, he can show us how to use Code Sandbox, and we're going to use that as part of our collaborative tool. And I'm hoping after he shows us how to use this tool, we can all work together or in separate teams on a coding problem. That's what I'm hoping for. So I'm just going to talk with Emilie and Chris as a little bit sidebar here. But you're all welcome to kind of chill out and talk amongst yourselves, and we will come back in like 15. Is that all right with everybody?
Yes.
All right, smoke them if you got them, or PP break, whatever you got to do. We'll see you in 15.
Emilie, are we able to unmute people for the remaining 7 minutes that we have until? Yeah, you muted everyone. Oh, I think people can unmute themselves. Is that not cool? Okay. Yeah, you probably can't unmute people because then people would just do that. I just figured that we could chat for the next 7 minutes until, in case if people aren't here.
I think I'm not important. Mary said you can't just unmute people, so.
Yeah, it would probably be like a security thing if you could just unmute people mid-thing. So, anyone have any exciting plans for the weekend?
Not supposed to go anywhere, so I guess it's.
Hey, you can always do exciting things
So somewhere on the internet, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I just finished watching The Mandalorian, so unfortunately not any excitement there, but I'm sure I'll find a new TV show to watch. I just got a new TV, so I'm like super excited about that.
The Expanse, or do you have Amazon?
Sorry?
The Expanse, have you heard of that one?
I have heard of it. Like I recognize the name,
Oh,
but I've
I know,
never
I know
watched it.
that. Yeah, it's with the space and everything, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Oh, have we released the last episode yet?
I have the finales next week, right? So I'm
Okay,
stoked for-
because the last one I know they spaced someone and it's like kind of stayed like that, and they were trying to get Mars, but then I didn't.
No spoilers.
sorry. You're right.
Anyway, if you haven't seen it, you like science fiction, highly recommended.
Oh, it's on Prime Video. Cool.
Yeah. So there's like, yeah, what is it, 5 seasons?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the next one.
There's books that go with it too, I guess.
What's
Oh,
it
that-
called?
Cool.
Yeah, so
The Expanse.
Expanse.
Oh, that's awesome, Sean. I suck at database, but I know SQL is very very important in whatever things we do.
Yeah, and SQLite's definitely a good thing to get started with because of it just being file based. You don't have to start up a server or anything. So definitely a good thing to play with. Just for reference, though, some things that you can do in a traditional SQL database you can't do in SQLite. So if you're going the opposite way, sometimes you're limited, but everything that you can do in SQLite, you should be able to do in other SQL databases.
Sorry, munching on carrots. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a bio break. Had a chance to chat. We're back at it. We're actually going to be covering I don't know why I struggle with that word. Collaborative tool. There's a few out there. Maybe some of you have heard of CodePen. Gosh, there's a whole bunch of them. The one that Chris showed Emilie and me was Code Sandbox. And what I was really impressed is that this particular test environment, they have a whole deployment feature. And so hopefully Chris can show us a little demo and he could deploy it to Netlify. So if you're thinking, wow, I'm making this project, it would be great to show off to potential employers. It'd be great to show off to friends, family, grandma, whoever. He's going to show you how to do it. He's going to show you how to host it for free on the interweb. So it's some useful kung fu skills, I think. So saying that, I'm going to hand it back to Chris. He is definitely busting his chops tonight. So please put a big hand together for Chris once again. We appreciate him stepping up tonight.
I mean, I didn't really do much. I just showed up. So, okay. So, I guess I'll share. Paul or Emilie, do you guys want to share the problem that we're going to be solving off of freeCodeCamp, just so that people have reference to it? And I will also share my screen. Make sure I'm sharing the right one. Number 2. Okay. So, the thing that we're going to be working on today is building a tribute page. This is offered on freeCodeCamp, and it has a full walkthrough of what the objective is. What they say is that you're going to be building it on CodePen. In this case, we're just going to be replacing CodePen with Code Sandbox. But part of the reason that we also made sure that everyone was signed up to GitHub before is Code Sandbox. One of the ways that you can log in is with GitHub. And of course, you can connect it to a GitHub right through it. So this is the interface once you have signed in, and you can click Create Sandbox in the upper right-hand corner, and it gives you a list of different templates that you can use. Myself, I use a lot of React, so you'll see here like React TypeScript and React. But today we're just going to be using the one that says vanilla. So this is for JavaScript. It just uses vanilla JavaScript and HTML and regular CSS. And then once you click on it, you'll see all of our stuff here. So I'm going to rename this as what is it? Tribute page. So let's call it tribute page freeCodeCamp, and it is January 29th. So there are some really cool things that I'm going to walk through first with Code Sandbox for those of you that might not be familiar with it. Oh, I have a timer that's going off. It's telling me it's 8 o'clock. Very important to know exactly when 8 o'clock is every day. So what's really nice about Code Sandbox is it is an editor inside of your web browser, essentially. So instead of having to have download and install, Visual Studio Code, Notepad, Sublime, any of those sort of editors, it's right here in your browser. And like most people say, as a photographer, the best camera to have is the one that you have with you. This is very similar. You can go to a library computer that refreshes itself every single day, and this is going to be available through the web. So like a typical text editor, you have your file explorer here on the left-hand side. You have some configuration files that we're probably not going to be going over today. It has one-click integration with GitHub. There's also a deployment tab, which we will go over after, and also a live section. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing this live session. I'm going to post the link in the chat once I find it. And what this does is it allows us to collaborate right through, very similar to like Google Drive. So if you go in there, we can see as people start popping in, we have one viewer right now, 2 viewers. And what's cool is as I go through these, you guys will be able to see me editing files, like I mentioned, very similar to like Google Drive. And this will require you to log in with GitHub, as mentioned prior. So the first thing, in order to make sure that we're meeting the solution for this problem, Paul sent a link to a JavaScript file that you can add to the project, and it will run tests against what you are doing. Oh, looks like there's someone who entered the waiting room. Unsure if it's bot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my index.html file. And from here, I am going to add the link to that bundle. So creating a script tag with a source to the freeCodeCamp bundle. And I will save it. And you'll notice that once I save, we have a live preview that is on the right-hand side. And eventually it should show up. Was working on my other one. Let me just give it a refresh. There we go. So the test suite shows up, and this test suite shows up in the upper left-hand corner. And when you choose the drop-down, we're going to be choosing tribute page and click run tests, and it will run the tests against what we have. So I'm going to click the X, and I'm going to remove some of the other things that we have here. I'm going to remove the div, but we're going to have the kind of standard skeleton of an HTML page. Oh, it's yelling at me because of my JavaScript. All right, let's remove all of that and save. Okay, so the first thing, let me move this over here so it's the right thing. So this is broken down into user stories. And if you're not familiar with user stories, it's a way of writing requirements for typically, like software projects. And it's essentially what needs to happen. So user story number 1 is my tribute page should have an element with a corresponding ID = main, which contains all other elements. So what this is saying is for user story number 1, we go in and we're going to create a div. And it needs to have an ID equal to main. So right now, if I save this, just want to make sure that, so this is popping up. And if I click run test right now, we're getting 1 out of 10. I don't know which one it is passing. Is it just like, oh, it says that I'm using HTML. So that's good. I'm using HTML. The only thing you can use on the web. So if we put in ID equals main, this might be one of the tests. We'll see. And again, once I save, it should live refresh. It's not for some reason, so I just click the refresh button, click run test, it's still, okay. So that didn't pass that test. But it said for user story number 2, Paul, is each one of these user stories a test in the test suite?
I believe so.
Okay. Let me
just verify.
Yeah. Is this a coding challenge? Kind of. It's a part of their lessons for learning that you can walk through. So this is a part of their boot camp of being able to learn how to program on the web.
Chris, when I was running the test, it did pass 2, and then it goes back to 1 test. So I don't know if it's having a problem with that bundle, but you can see it quickly pass and then fail.
Yeah, I only see 1. So ID main, let me. So it does have a div of ID equals main. The other thing that we can do is on their website, you can just put in the solution link. Oh, it's saying, oh, there's this other bundle that's not the same one that you sent me, I think. I'm going to copy the one that's right here. Let's try this. Or is it the same one? Maybe it is. It's the same one. Okay. How about this? I'm going to put it above. See what happens. Maybe it just wants it to be a main with an ID of main. See, this is always fun with programming. You never know what could be wrong. Okay, run test. It still says 1 of 10. Well, I'm just going to continue and assume that I'm doing it right for right now. So step number 2, it says I should see an element with a corresponding ID equals title, which contains a string, i.e. text, that describes the subject of the tribute page. And then they give an example.
Who should we tribute?
Yeah, who should we tribute?
Should I
could write a tribute to myself. Sorry?
should we set up a poll?
We can.
Yeah, it should be fun.
All right, let me set up a poll here.
For now, I'm just going to put name here, and I'm going to be putting in that ID equals title as we do that. I'll just continue on. So ID equals title. And when I click refresh, hopefully that thing pops up. Tribute page. Oh, now it's 3 of 10. I think it was just, oh, you want to what, Paul? I think he was expecting there to be content inside of main. I think that's why. And because main was empty, it was like, I ain't cool with that.
Okay. It's being a stickler.
Yes. Well, I think it was very specific in saying that which contains all other elements. So For user story 3, it says, I should see a div element. So now being very specific of the element type that we're using, element with a corresponding ID image div. So I'm going to copy that and create a div, as I mentioned, with an ID of image div and put the corresponding tag there. The other thing that you guys might see this as I save, it's using something called Prettier, which will do automatic formatting of my code as I save. So if I have this kind of tabbed in weird, and when I click save, you'll see that it will automatically format the page for me. And what's nice about this is, you'll easily be able to find opening and closing tags. And it just kind of makes it so that your work is a little bit cleaner. So, okay, so we created a div. I'm going to maybe say yes, but I don't know what black for Python is. I know what Python is, but I'm not familiar with black. But if black does automatic formatting of your code, then yes. So we've completed the first 4 user stories. And it says for user story number 5, within the image div element, referring to the one that we just created before. Oh no, sorry, I skipped number 4. Look at that, I'm going ahead. Within the image div element, we need to create an image element with a corresponding ID of image. We seem to love putting IDs on everything. This is probably for their tests, but it makes sense. So in here, we're going to create a image element using img and then put an ID of image. And in this case, this is only because I already know this, but images are self-closing. So instead of having an opening brace and a closing brace, we just use the slash and then closing. So this is self-closing. So we have an ID of image on that. Within the image div element, we should see an element with a corresponding ID of image caption that contains contextual content describing the image shown in image div. Also, did we end up getting that poll figured out of who we're doing this for?
Just about to launch. It's not going to be very serious, but I will launch it shortly. Cool.
So in this case, I'm going to use a paragraph tag right underneath it. So a p tag is really good for essentially most text. I would say 99% of text will probably be in a p tag. Otherwise, it would be in like a heading tag, which is H1 through H6. You can put text in other elements as well, like a div or a span, button, stuff like that. I will do it if it's Baby Yoda. A definition of a div. Yeah, it is, I believe it's just a division or like a divider, not like a true divider, but it's basically meaning like a chunk of whatever. Does div actually have a meaning? Let's see. Yeah, it's like a section. Div is fairly old. It goes back to like the word section, like the section element didn't used to exist previously. But div tag defines a division or a section in an HTML document. Or you could also think of it like a wrapper around something. So
we got 2 more votes out there, but I think it's official. It's going to be Yoda.
It is Yoda. All right, we're going to use Baby Yoda. That's my personal preference, though. And explaining the difference between a div and a span, sure. So it actually, technically, this is the thing with HTML. HTML tags don't really matter. You can put in actually, technically, I think you can put in whatever arbitrary tags that you want. But at the end of the day, like a div and a span are both things that you can create content with. So let's say I do test one really quick. And I'm just going to copy this to multiple lines. So you'll see here I have test one 4 times. And every time that I use a div or a division, it creates a new line. Now, if I use span and said test 2 with a span, and I copied this 1, 2, 3, 4 times, you'll see that it puts them side by side. And the reason for this is the browser applies, I guess maybe I should go over this. If you're not familiar with CSS, CSS is what is used to style a page. Stands for cascading style sheets. And it's a way of adding, flair to our website. HTML is the structure, CSS is the styling. And a div has a property called display, and its default property is block. Block. So what that says is as soon as this div ends, do a new line. Whereas span uses a display of inline. And what that means is that those elements are beside each other until if I throw in another div, you'll see that it has now ended that. So that's very briefly the difference between div and span. But technically, if I do this, if I do a style and I say display block, you'll see it does the exact same thing as a div. That's kind of the one thing that's a little bit confusing about HTML is tags are arbitrary. They don't really mean anything, but they can. So, okay, so we're doing Yoda. I'm going to put baby Yoda in here. And if we go to the next part, it says we need a caption. So first, I guess, in order to write a caption, we need a photo. So I'm going to say baby Yoda.
Sorry, Chris, I was munching on mini carrots here, but we had a question about which Prettier extension do you use?
Oh, good question. Let me open up my thing here. I think it's just called Prettier. There's a bunch of different ones, but it's the one with 10.4 million installs. You can pretty much ignore everything else. And this is usually a good recommendation. Just look at the one that has the most installs. But okay, so we're gonna get a photo of baby Yoda. I'm just gonna copy the image path and I'm gonna put it as the source of this image. So here we go, we have baby Yoda. And it said that it wanted us to describe it. So I'm just gonna say a picture of Rogue. How did you spell it? Grogu, aka baby Yoda, in his natural habitat, because that makes sense. So, okay, so we have that, and it also wants us to add an ID of tribute info. No, that's it so far for that one. Next one says, I should see an element with an ID of tribute info, which contains contextual content describing the subject of the tribute page. Paul, do you want to give maybe some more context on what it's wanting me to do? It just wants me to describe baby Grogu as a person.
Which user story was that?
It was number 6.
Stand by.
I'll just take this information that's right here. He's a character from Star Wars Disney Plus. But that's who he is. Okay.
Yeah, it's when I did this one, yeah, it was is it just the ID it's asking for? ID.
Yeah, it says just an element with tribute info. So I'm assuming I just kind of pasted in a quick description of Baby Yoda.
That's perfect. I think they part of this project too is to teach people how to make what's the term? Accessible. For like
accessibility.
Accessibility for screen readers and things like that.
Yep. So that actually goes back to why I had recommended whenever you're using text to put it in what are called semantic elements. So P just again stands for paragraph, and this is a common element for putting your text into. So I'm going to say P tribute info, and then it also mentions for user story number 7, it wants to see an A tag. And for those that aren't familiar, A stands for anchor, which is essentially a link. So we're going to be putting in an anchor element with a corresponding ID of tribute link, which links to an outside site that contains additional information. So meaning that we're not on localhost or whatever our current thing is. In this case, I'm just going to link to the page for Grogu from the Star Wars fandom, essentially Wikipedia for Star Wars. So in here, on a new line, I'm going to create an anchor element that has an href going to our link. There was a little more that was there that I'll do after. I'll just say find out more. And inside of here, it says you must give your element an attribute of target and set it to blank in order for your link to open in a new tab. And this is something to know. So a link property, by default, when you click it, it will go to that page. So you can see right here, like it just brought me to the new page within Code Sandbox. If I click refresh, if you type in target and then write in _blank, where did it go? There we go. Now when I click on it, it will open it in a new tab for me. So this is something when you're working on a website, it is usually extremely common to have this principle where if a link is on your website, you don't use target blank. So this is like, when you're on here, if I'm wanting to navigate and find out information about Qui-Gon Jinn or the Darksaber, I can click on that and it doesn't open in a new tab. But when you are going to a new website, linking off, it is common to open that in a new tab. That's usually like a best practice that people will follow. And for some reason, I don't like the way that it's formatting that. There we go. Okay. So now we have it linking off of the page. I'm going to click refresh and hope that that test thing pops up and we can run the test so far. And we have 7 out of 10 passing. So that's good. And did it want an ID on that? It did. It wanted an ID of tribute link. So let me add that as well. So now for step 8, the image element should responsively resize relative to the width of its parent element without exceeding its original size. So now this is where we use some CSS. So in here, I'm going to create, I already have a styles.css that I'm going to reference. And I'm going to create a link, which is, I use the rel property. And say source/styles.css. And then I'm going to be honest, I always forget exactly what I need to do for this. Is it, I think type equals style sheet. I'm going to assume this works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into styles and just make the background color purple. If the background goes purple, then I correctly linked it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Let's see if I click refresh. That didn't work. What if I just do slash? Does that work? Oh. Do it that way. Okay. So the background is still not. So that leaves me, I don't think it's rel then. So link, style sheet, HTML, something that I should probably know off the top of my head, but I don't. Oh, rel equals style sheet and href is what I need. Okay. So this becomes href and this becomes rel. There we go. Now I'm linking it correctly. So now I can remove that background color. So what we're wanting to do is making it so that if I use the dev tools for a sec, I'm gonna actually do this in a new window just so it's not as squished. So we have our image tag and we have our wrapping div. And what it is saying is the image element should responsively resize relative to the width of its parent element without exceeding its original size. So what we can say, in this case, I'm going to be using the dev tools to mess around with it and just see what happens. So in here, I could say like width is 100%, but that's obviously huge and is larger than its original size. We could say that the max width is 100%. And what that'll say is that the max width that this image can be is 100% relative to its parent. So when I shrink it, it will get smaller, but it won't get bigger. And I think that might be what it's wanting us to use. So I can, actually, I should probably write the code first. So on our image, do we not have a ID on the image tag? Image div.
ID image caption. ID image number 4.
Where do you see that? Sorry.
User story number 4.
Yeah. Oh, it's just ID equals image. I don't think I ever added that. Oh no, I did. I'm just blind. Okay. So in order to target an ID in CSS, we use the, gonna call it the hashtag or the pound operator, whatever you want to call it. We can just say image. And this allows us to target by an ID. So I'm gonna put in max width of 100%. Save that. And if I reopen this and inspect it, you can see here, we can see the CSS that's being loaded, which is a max width of 100%. And that, oh, that's the inline one. This one's coming from styles.css. So that is working. Okay. And then the last one, the image element should be centered within its parent element. So what makes it the parent element? Sorry, I'm not. Need a little more for that.
I guess because the instructions say parent element this, parent element that. Does it mean like it's if something's nested in it, that's what makes it a parent?
Yeah. So the terminology that people typically use is parent and child.
Yeah.
So in this case, body has a child of main, and I should be able to hide these. So you can see that it has a child of main and it has these two scripts that are here. And then main has a child of this h1, this div, this paragraph tag, this anchor tag, and it cascades from there. You can also look at it as the opposite, of course, like this child has a parent of main, main has a parent of body, body has a parent of HTML. So what it's saying is that the image should be centered within its parent element. And what that's referring to is visually, you can see here, this is the image and this is the image div. And what it's saying is within image div, it should be in the center of whatever this width happens to be. So if I shrink it right now, image div is smaller and it still should be centered. So I'm unsure about which way that it wants me to do it. The easiest way to do it is by saying that the image is display block and it has a margin of 0 auto. And to explain what that's doing, inline, which an image by default is inline, is not able to have margins, or at least a margin left and right, because when something is display block, hold on, let me just go back to using that. So if I use margin 0 auto, you can see that it's not doing anything, because if you had a bunch of elements that were display inline, they would just all go beside each other. Whereas display block means that on this line, this is what gets to go here. So in this case, you can say display block, and margin 0 auto, what it does is it says, this is a shorthand syntax. So margin allows you to specify how much is around it. So if I wanted to put in 18 pixels, this is the shorthand for saying on the top, bottom, left, and right, we want to have 18 pixels. But that's not the format that it does for displaying it. How it actually does it is you actually have a bunch of different ways. So if you just have one value, it's for top, down, left, and right. If you have two values, so 0 and auto, the first value is for top and bottom, and the second value is for the left and right. You can also do this, which would be the top, the right, the bottom, and then the left. So it kind of spins like a clock, starts at 12, goes to 3, goes to 6, goes to 9. And that's how that works. You can also do one other thing, which is a 3-value one, which is where you're specifying the value on the top, the value on the left and right, and the value on the bottom. So in this case, we just want the shortest is 0 auto. So in our CSS, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to say display block, margin is 0 auto. There are also other ways of being able to move something to the center. There are ways to make it so that the parent is responsible for positioning its children. In this case, it's just, this code is for positioning itself. So if I refresh that and run the tests, we have 10 out of 10. And if you click into that, it gives you all the information. So this is good. So now what you might want to do is be able to deploy this. So what you can do, for one, you can also create a Git repository if you wanted to do that. In this case, I'm not going to do that. But deploy, you have one-click deploys, which is really handy. So you can click deploy to Netlify. And when you do that, it should, last time when I showed this off to Paul, it wasn't working.
I mean, the
What it
concept
will
was
do,
exciting.
yeah. So what this does is Netlify is used for static hosting. And what that means is, you know, stuff that doesn't change, doesn't have a server, effectively what boils down to being static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you're using something like Python or using Node or .NET, any of those sort of things, those will not work on Netlify unless if it can go through a build process that will only generate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But anyway, once it goes through that process, I should be able to click Visit Site. And there's nothing there. That's cool. Okay, it's just starting the build right now. So you can see here that it's doing some work, some stuff that isn't necessarily as important right now. No, you cannot use Netlify to deploy a Node.js site. Something that you can use to deploy a Node.js site, though, is you could use Heroku, which has a free tier of being able to deploy server code. But if you have like an application that is, say, using like React or Angular or Vue and is entirely, again, client side, you can deploy that to Netlify that then talks to a server. Okay, so looks like it says that it deployed. If I click Visit Site, here is our deployed site. I can click Contribute Page, click Run Tests, and it's still 10 out of 10. And then from here, I can copy that, paste it in to our solution link, and say that I have completed the challenge. And it says, good job. So that's one thing that is really handy about Code Sandbox is you can just click and now your code is available to be seen. As Paul said, you could make a website and send it to your grandma and she would be able to see it. Now, the one thing that is not as nice is someone might be wondering like, well, how do I get like my domain up here? And this is like a little bit more advanced, but Netlify does have the ability to attach a custom domain to your URL that you have. So if I click Claim Site, this should bring me into Netlify to being able to attach it to my account. We tried this last time and that's what did not work. Netlify your Code Sandbox v2 project. We're going to just say, yeah, do whatever. Hey, here it is. That's the one. So I can click that. And there's an option that says domain settings here. So in here, if you happen to have a custom domain that is pointed towards Netlify, you can just add it in, whatever it happens to be. So it could be like example.naismith.dev. It says, hey, that thing already has a thing. I say, yeah, that's me. And you can see right now that it says that it's not set up properly. So until I configure this domain, I won't be able to use that for what's going on here. So I could walk through that really quick. Paul, do you see that as a benefit of being able to attach a custom domain?
Well, hey, you know what? However long you want to speak, I just want to take a quick survey of how everyone's doing. Are we doing good? Do we need another bio break, or do you want Chris just to chug along? If you could just throw your 2 cents in the chat, it'd be appreciated. This is a nice pace you're going, Chris, by the way.
Cool.
I can chug along. Okay, I got 1 vote for chug along. I'm easy. Chris is it easy. People might take advantage of you, Chris. I'm just saying, throwing that out there. Doing good, Brittany. Okay. All right, Chris.
All right. So let's attach a custom domain to it then. You'll probably be shocked at how easy it is to do this, at least in most modern applications. So in this case, I use Google domains. That's where I have bought them, but this could be, I don't recommend GoDaddy, but it could be GoDaddy. It could be Namecheap. It could be domains.com. It doesn't really matter. All of them, I think for the most part, if you're using a reputable domain reseller, will give you the ability to configure what is called DNS. And DNS is what we use. Why not GoDaddy? Don't get me started. I could go into more detail, but GoDaddy is not, I'm not a big fan. So in here, so for my naismith.dev domain, I want to go to DNS. In this case, you saw I used example.naismith.dev. And what example is it's called the subdomain. And this says I own the domain naismith.dev, and I can create as many subdomains off of that as I want. I could create example, I could create example2, I could create test, doesn't matter. I can make as many arbitrary ones as I want. So in here, and the other thing is like, don't worry about any, you shouldn't be worried about ever sharing this information that's right here, because technically all of this DNS information is publicly accessible. This is how websites or browsers and everything know how to redirect traffic. So none of this is actually confidential information. But what you do is at this @ symbol, this is saying what the prefix is. So you can see, as I mentioned before, like I have that cookbook website. So the @ symbol is replaced by a cookbook. This is the prefix or our subdomain. So in this case, I type in example. And you have a couple of different ways to do it. There's a big list here of different things that you can use, but I'm going to use a Cname. And what a Cname does is it points to another instance. So in this case, also, I'm not going to do this entirely by myself. If I click C DNS configuration, it will tell you what you should be setting up. So example, Cname, and this is what you want to copy paste in. So I'm just going to copy it. I don't have to memorize it. And I put that under domain name and click add. So now you'll see example is right here. And this can sometimes take a little bit. It depends on how quickly your DNS provider updates. Google is actually pretty quick. Amazon is also really quick. But sometimes this is one of the things with GoDaddy. It can sometimes take up to 24 hours for their DNS to update. One little trick that sometimes people do is before they want to change their DNS, days in advance, you can change this value, which is the TTL, time to live. I think that's what it stands for. Yeah, time to live. And it says basically how long on average it should cache this result. So it recommends 1 hour for caching. So you could change this down to being like 10 minutes, 5 minutes if you're going to be changing it. As for a Cname, there are tons of different things. I'm trying to remember. It stands for canonical name record or an alias record. So essentially I am aliasing example.naismith.dev to this URL. And now I should be able to tell it to check. If I just refresh the page, it might recheck it for me. Let's see.
We have a question, Chris. So what's
caching? Yeah, so caching, and just for spelling, is spelled C-A-C-H-I-N-G. What caching is trying to think how to reference it. So doing sometimes checks can be considered expensive, right? Or it can take a while. So what caching is let's say you ask me a question like, hey, if I add $1 to $2, like how much is that? And I would respond back saying 3 because I know that. But if you ask me that a question immediately after, it obviously takes me much less time to remember that. So I can say it's 3. You say, what's 1 plus 2? 3. What's 1 plus 2? 3. But over time, if it's say a more complicated thing, I might forget what that is. You know, I've kind of removed it from my brain. So you can think of caching as something that is currently in your mind at a computer level. It's remembering it, but the moment that it is no longer cached, it then has to go out and double check what that value might be. So in this case, GoDaddy will remember that example translates to this Netlify app for up to 1 hour. If it's over 1 hour, it's not guaranteed to remember it, and it might take a little bit longer to figure out what it is. So the one tip of advice that people recommend is, if this isn't going to change ever, it's pretty safe to set the TTL as being very high, but most people recommend just doing 1 hour as the default. It's temporarily stored. So the whole thing about cache is that it's never permanent, because, let's say I make this change, and this is the thing with caching. I should also be more specific with this. If something is cached for 1 hour and then I change the source of truth, it might be out of date for up to 1 hour. So that can be part of the issue is caching. Can be convenient, but it can also be a hindrance as well if it's not configured correctly. And you can compare it to like RAM, yes. So you could think of it like, that's actually a really good point, is comparing it to RAM. So on a computer, you have your hard drive, which stores everything permanently, but is a little bit slower, whereas RAM stores it temporarily, but is fast. So you read something from disk, from the hard drive, and load it into memory. Memory can read it a lot faster, but if it doesn't need it anymore, it gets rid of it. And then it has to read from the hard drive again. So it looks like this has been updated. If I now go to example.naismith.dev, it's going to yell at me and say that DNS or HTTPS isn't configured, I think. Let's see. Oh, I might have to. Okay, so it says that is fine. What happens if I just refresh this? Okay, it's yelling at me for this. This isn't necessarily as big of a deal. It's definitely annoying. Error, cert, bad. What? It might just take a little bit for it to update. But essentially, in this case, HTTPS or an SSL certificate is used so that when you go to a site, your traffic is protected or encrypted. In this case, it's not recognizing it, but maybe I can just go to HTTP and it'll be fine. No, it's enforcing HTTPS. So, but the other domain still works. So I'm not sure what's going on there. It might be something kind of simple to fix, or it might just resolve itself, to be honest. It says that the verification was successful. It might take a couple minutes for it to update. But that's how you attach a custom domain to it. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, this is the fun part where you just have to wait.
And this is like, honestly, this is a whole education, I think, because I'm missing in a lot of places. Is if you follow any tutorial, they'll show you how to set something up on your local machine, but then when you try to put it online, like what Chris is doing is he's making it nice and slick, so they don't have to memorize this wacky URL. They just have to go to example his website, and he's aligning traffic. It's yeah, this whole piece was awesome, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Do we have any questions? I know there was a few questions about caching. I'm just going to try to take a stab at it too. And this covers in computer science classes, the classes where a lot of students just kind of check out and snooze, and I was definitely one of them. But the whole DSN system is quite complicated, and I mean, you'd have to have a whole lecture just on that. But basically, it doesn't happen instantaneously. What Chris is doing is he's announcing this new website, and it has to travel to all these different servers around the world so that they all agree, yes, if you go to this URL, it's going to direct it to this website. And so he's put all the ducks in a row, but the information still has to travel. And like he pointed out, it's going to have an hour of living in the past, maybe potentially.
Yeah, can I jump in really quick? Actually, I think another good comparison is comparing DNS to like a phone book, truly, because a phone book, you know, you can search someone up, and this is the comparison is that at some point a domain name boils down to a set of numbers of an IP address. And that's what DNS kind of is for, is saying like, hey, here's a nice name that you can type, and we'll convert that into the IP address that you need to connect to on the web. And so when you have the phone book, you know, you can look someone up by their name and it'll tell you what their phone number is, very similar to DNS. But in order to know what someone's phone number is, if I change my phone number right after the phone book comes out, that phone book is out of date. Or you could think of it as it's a cache result, right? Because until that next phone book comes out, it's not going to have the new value of what my new phone number is. And if someone is holding on to a phone book that is severely out of date, more and more numbers in that phone book are going to be out of date. And that's why caching can be partially an issue, is if someone is, you know, trying to be over optimizing by caching for a long time, those values might not be up to date anymore. So that's why by default, in this case, it uses 1 hour. And you might think like 1 hour is really short, but in the grand scheme of things, if you wanted to make a change and you have to wait an hour, imagine, you know, we've probably all seen, especially recently due to COVID and high traffic volumes, you know, like Netflix or Facebook or multiple sites going down. So if you had to point to a new server saying, hey, we need to get this up now, if you had to wait an hour, that's a long time.
I have a question related to caching, and I don't know if I'm mixing my classes here. I was doing PHP and I was working on authentication and authorization, and he mentioned cache for password. And here we're talking about like DSN. Am I like mixing my classes, or I didn't make
Oh, sorry. I was trying to think there for a sec.
Sorry.
Hashing. So those are two different things. So caching, which I'm just going to type this, cache/caching. That is the, you know, thing of keeping something temporarily. Then there's hash or hashing. And this is using like an algorithm that's able to take a set of letters and numbers and converting it into what is called a hash. So yeah, definitely similar in sounding, if I'm not being as clear with my words, but yeah, they are two different things.
No, like a hashing, like when you know, like when you do password, it has a bunch of letters and stuff like that. So when I was coding it, it's like I needed to set a certain amount of characters. So that's why we were calling it hashing, nothing to do with hashtag.
Yeah. So yeah, it's nothing like a hashtag. Also, to answer your question, Steph, so it doesn't cache. Oh, hey, now it's working. See, now my SSL is working. It's not an issue anymore. So when you update your website, it will still be instantaneous. So what DNS solely is saying, this is the name and this is where it points to. It will still grab that content. So it would be like, yeah, like, you know, you type into Google saying, hey, what's the location of Walmart? And it'll say, oh, it's at this address. And you're like, okay, you go there. It's not like the store is going to be out of date from the last time they asked what the address was, because the store is still fully up to date. Yes, purely for the site name. It's just so that way your browser knows where example.naismith.dev goes. And the other thing is not only does there are multiple levels to DNS caching. There is caching that your local computer will do, so that way, let's say you go to google.ca. If your computer caches that result, it doesn't have to know where to. It doesn't have to ask where to go. It just already knows. Then you have like browser, or not browser, like network. Your router will probably also cache DNS records, then your ISP will also cache them. Like there's multiple levels going up the chain of caching it. And then you just have like DNS providers like Google and stuff like that. They have essentially the master list. As for hashing for quick lookups, that one is a little bit different. So, so what you can do is in JavaScript. So that's, I'm going to create this. So const temp equals an object. So let's say I have like, actually, let's create an array that has apples, bananas, and something. I don't know, my brain is blank. And maybe it has more information, like maybe you have a certain number of bananas and apples and so on and so forth. So what sometimes will happen is people will create a object that contains a hash of knowing certain things. So that hash is something that is repeatable. And that's ultimately what's important is I can look someone up by a hash ID of, let's say it's in here, and I could say object.hash, which in this case just happens to be apple, and I get the result of 1, 2, 3, rather than having to go through everything in this array to find out what the value of, say, apples would be. So this is, honestly, this is probably a pretty bad example, but essentially when you're hashing, you can, it's always predictable. It's expected input, expected output. So if you give it the exact same string, it will always produce the same hash. Yes, Paul, you have a question?
Oh, I'm just curious if you want to tackle on CDNs at all.
Oh,
Is that something?
Yeah, CDN is essentially just like cache.
Yes.
So in this case, CDN, so this actually goes to what Steph had said. Steph had asked the question, if someone is caching DNS, does that mean if they're holding it for 1 hour, if they go to my site, it's out of date for up to 1 hour? So for DNS, no, but you can cache multiple things. So in this case, I'm going to bet that this website that we're using right now is cached. Actually, it is. You just saw me refresh it. Nothing showed up under network, but there's this handy button that says disable cache. Now when I refresh it, maybe I was just under XHR. So in here, you can see, okay, so this has cache control of no cache. So what happens with CDNs, which for those that don't know stands for Content Delivery Network, is let's say you have like one server, and that server is going to be located in, well, my company is based out of Utah, so let's say Utah. So you have a server that's hosted in Utah, but I am, say, living in Barrie. And every single time that I want to get content from my work, it has to go to Utah. So I make a connection. My query goes to Utah. Utah comes back with the result that I want. And the speed of light, I mean, it's pretty quick, obviously. But fun fact, like, it actually has severe impacts on how we do networking, because if you want to send a packet from here to the other side of the planet, like directly opposite, it's at least 100 milliseconds because of the speed of light. So what a CDN does is, let's have a temporary server that's maybe closer. Let's say in this case, it's in Toronto. So things that are commonly requested from people in Toronto will be cached in there, so that way the total round trip is now shorter. I don't have to go all the way to Utah to get, say, a JavaScript file or a CSS file or an HTML file. It's cached in Toronto, so that round trip is shorter. So that's what a CDN does. It takes static resources that are typically requested pretty commonly in order to give it to you. Cool. Does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask. I like how there's been a lot of hashing questions, which is completely unrelated to what we've been doing, but I have no problem asking. I think it would probably be easier to draw some of this thing. Not that I'm I'm not artistic at all, but.
I think you have access to a whiteboard if you want to take a crack at it. If you want to go full professor mode, I think there's an option.
Is there? They are great, Sean. I think. Good question. I do throw cornstarch in the mix, though. That helps. So let's see if I can, yeah, I can draw. Cool. So yeah, so you have me, and you have Utah right here. This is actually going to probably be way easier. And then you have the CDN. So this is commonly what would happen is essentially you would ask the CDN for, let's say, an image. And this CDN would check, do I have that image? And if it doesn't, and this is you can think of this as the longest case that would happen, the CDN would then have to go to Utah and ask for the image. And then Utah will respond back with that image. And then the CDN would then respond back with it. But here's the fun part, because, you know, if you go to any Facebook image, it's going to have like a path, right? Like it's not just going to be like image.png. It's going to be most likely a hash. So let's say SHA-256 hash generator. I'm just trying to do this for an example. Let's put in something, my image.png. So let's say we ask for this image. We say, give me that image. And now the CDN will store that image. So the second time that I go to ask for that exact same image, when I go back to the CDN already knows that it has that image. So let me draw some arrows. See, this is why I said you don't want me to draw. So the second time that you go to the CDN to ask for that image, the CDN already knows what the content is. So it doesn't have to go to Utah in order to get it. And then it can respond back with it much quicker, because say this might be 30 milliseconds, and maybe it takes 30 milliseconds to respond back. But this might be an additional 30 milliseconds and another additional 30 milliseconds. So in theory, when you do this the first time, it takes 30 milliseconds, another 30 milliseconds, another 30 milliseconds, another 30 milliseconds for 120 milliseconds or 0.12 seconds. But the next time that you go to load it, it will only take 60. So literally cutting it in half. Now, this isn't as big of a deal until you have something that's more like this. Oh, there's shapes. This is much easier.
You've just stepped up the production value.
I have. And now I'm going to use text. Look at me go. Let's throw some names in here. I'm just going to put Cook's last name just because I don't want to say there's two Chris's. That'll be confusing. So in the case of let's say my domain that's right here, example, my example application. So if we're all requesting it, again, the first person who goes to it is going to have to go to the server where it's located. In this case, again, it's Utah, but it could be anywhere. But everyone else also benefits if they're hitting the same CDN. And that's what the benefit of a CDN is that you can create networks or nodes that are really close to people. And the more people that are requesting that same file or same website, or depending on what you're trying to cache in the CDN, it reduces the amount of time that it takes for each user.
Have you played with CDNs, Chris? I've just learned. Yeah. Okay. Because whenever I look into AWS, they always talk about that. They talk about making sure you set up your availability zones correctly and your CDN zones correctly. So is this common? Is this common for you, like to deal with CDNs?
So I don't really deal with them much anymore. I have in the past as a more full stack, but essentially like a lot of tooling does it for you. So I'm trying to think of CloudFront, or is it Cloudflare? CloudFront is AWS's CDN, but Cloudflare is also a CDN, and they do CDN things for multiple different things. But essentially, like what Cloudflare does is they have a bunch of servers that are all around the world. So the example that we gave here is a single CDN. And this CDN is only beneficial if the amount of time that it takes to go to the CDN's back is faster than the amount of time that it takes for you to go to the original server. So let's say the CDN is in Toronto and then the server is in Utah. If you're in Utah, it doesn't make sense to go to the CDN because it would be faster to go to the server than to go to the CDN, which is why you have multiple CDNs. And then people just, and the reason that you have multiple CDNs is, again, all of these CDNs can use a single source of truth to cache the result. So what Cloudflare does is they have, last I knew, they had hundreds, if not thousands, of little nodes all around the world, from Toronto to Vancouver to, a bunch of different states, Europe, Asia, everywhere. They have little servers that are just sitting there as little CDNs. And if you set it up, you can say, hey, store this file. If you set up your cache result correctly, and this is where I had it somewhere here, you can see that this cache control header is right here. So when the server sends a file, whether it be HTML, CSS, JavaScript, doesn't matter, it says what the caching time on it is. So very similar to like when we had with DNS, where you have a TTL, you set the TTL for the file as well. So that CDN is able to cache that result for an hour, a day. I think the default that CloudFront, which is AWS's CDN, does is about 24 hours by default. Or actually, is CloudFront their CDN? Yes, yeah, it is.
And I should say, I mean, you have to be a big deal. You have to be a big operation or a popular website to start looking into this stuff, right? I mean,
not necessarily.
Oh, I mean, okay.
You can just do it pretty easily. Now I'll say this: like most people, let's say that you're, now we're getting into say like local business stuff. So let's say that you are a local bakery, right? Based out of Barrie, you make donuts and other baked goods. Does it make sense to have a CDN that is globally distributed so that way people in China or Japan, the second time that they go to your site is going to be a lot faster? Probably not, because it's doubtful that you're getting a lot of orders from Japan. So there's of course context there, but I mean, let's say
digital service or something of that nature.
Well, you could say like my company, like Jane.com. So you could even say the US. So let's say from California to New York, speed of light. Is there a way to like measure the speed of light between two things? Measure speed of light between two cities. Not that I can find. Calculate distance or time. Okay, so whatever. Anyway, so let's say, again, same thing that it takes. So I think it's about 150 or 110, something like that, from one side of the planet to the other. So let's say it's like 50 or 30. Let's go super low. Let's say 30 from West Coast to East Coast in the US. Every single file that you take is now not just 30, it's 60, because again, round trip. You request the file comes back. So minimum 60 milliseconds, and that's if everything is traveling at the speed of light. You have people that have copper lines. So you have fiber to the street, but copper to the home. That's going to slow it down. You have the processing time on the server, trying to find files, trying to process stuff, calculations, all that sort of stuff has to happen on the server and is going to slow it down. So when, just trying to find what I had open. It was literally this. So you can see here on this website, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different files that all had to be sent to me. In this case, this one was a 404 because it's looking for a favicon. But we had 5 files that were sent to us with just this static website. So each one of these files has a size, has its own amount of time that it takes to send to you. So in a normal website, like let's go to, we're gonna see what happens here. I don't know how many files this is gonna be. It'll be fun to see. Let's do a full refresh. Oh, get an error message. I think that's because I clicked the stop downloading button. Okay, so we're at 22, 37, 40, 41, 50, 77, 82, 84, 89, 90. So we have a fair amount of files here. So you can see, like, for every single one of these, if you can reduce the amount of time that it takes to get that file to you, like, it is huge, because not only are you just affecting one file, you're affecting 90. And as I scroll, I'm also going to get more of these.
I feel like we would almost have to dedicate a whole meeting just to talk about Chrome dev tools, because I mean, there's so many things under the hood. I hear about Lighthouse all the time.
Yeah, Lighthouse scores. Yep.
I hear about the inspector, how you can go frame by frame and it shows you what's loading first. I mean, and I suspect you could walk us through quite a bit of this. Okay,
yeah,
everybody.
I'm just using Firefox, but
Firefox. Oh, see, I assumed you were using Chrome. That was foolish of me to jump to that conclusion. How are you holding up, Chris? You good? You hydrated?
Yeah, I mean, I have my Yeti here, staying hydrated. I figured I can let someone else talk though if they want. Pass the torch off to you.
Okay. Well, I didn't have anything other planned really, other than maybe, what is Lighthouse? Of course, I have to say a word, and that brings up a bunch of questions. Lighthouse, as far as I understand, and Chris could probably talk to this a little bit better, but it's, I think it's a Google performance tool. So what you can do is you can run your website through Lighthouse, and I think Chris could probably talk a little bit more about that.
Can I try to explain?
Yeah, take it over. You can even share your screen if you want.
Okay, I'll try. Okay, so I was on a bunch of stuff. Let's do this. right click, inspect, and then you have Lighthouse here. And then you have
Just to
like a
be clear
bunch.
though, for people to note, the Lighthouse tool is only available inside of Chrome, in the Chrome DevTools. So if you're using Firefox, it won't be there, but Lighthouse does also have a website as well.
Okay, I didn't know that. So yeah, so you have different kinds of stuff like SEO, accessibility, progressive. And what does that mean? Basically, now I'm on LinkedIn. So if I want to know, okay, let's generate a report. Yeah, it's a bit slow. And it's going to give me a bunch of information. For example, it can tell me that, just an example, it's going to tell me like, for example, LinkedIn is not responsive. Or it's 80% responsive. And what does that mean is that, for example, if you are using LinkedIn on a mobile phone, it can be like very not user friendly. You know, sometimes when you open a website on a phone and it's too big and you have to switch it here and there. So it means it's not very responsive. Okay, let me try to show you. Maybe my explanation is not very.
Go to the one that,
yeah.
like, go to example, example.naismith.dev, the website that we just did together.
Which one? Example?
Yep, example.naismith, NAISMITH.dev. Period in between that.
Yeah. Okay.
Nope, not that one.
Not
You'll
that
have
one?
to, no, just copy what you have in Google into the search bar. There we go.
Okay, so you see how I shrink it like that? So it means it's responsive because it's kind of move with it. But sometimes you have certain websites where depending on the size of your phone or your tablet, if you do that, it's not going to make the image smaller or larger. That's an example of an unresponsive device. So when you go on Lighthouse, I forgot where I had it. So it's going to generate a report and it's going to tell you different stuff. Like, for example, the color is not very good. So some people are colorblind and they will be like, okay, this color is not a good match. In terms of responsiveness, just like 20% or 30%. So in a nutshell, Lighthouse is a tool to tell you, let's say, the performance of your website, if I explain it correctly.
Yeah, it's a tool that scans your website and is able to give you different metrics based off of different categories that you choose. So as Emilie had shown there, you have performance as one, accessibility is another, progressive web app. Essentially, a progressive web app is, if you've ever used, more so if you've seen it on Android, but you can use it on iOS as well. If you view a website and it says add to your home screen, that is a progressive web app. And it allows you to scan your website and it will automatically make recommendations where you can improve. Because the whole point of Lighthouse is improving the web for users. So a good example is being, if you're serving images in PNG, it will probably give you a different format that compresses better, so that way the file size that you're sending to users is much smaller. So I'll say, hey, if you use this other format, you might save 30% of bandwidth that you're sending to your users. And while you might not care, if you're on a 3G connection, it's going to take longer to download a larger image than a smaller image.
We have another question. Someone wants to address it.
Oh, yeah, I can take that. So it depends. I wouldn't necessarily worry about changing the file name so that way it's not cached. Again, most things it might take up to like 24 hours to clear. But for the most part, unless if you're already working in an environment that has a pretty aggressive CDN caching layer, I don't think it really matters. But if it doesn't work, just sometimes that's the thing, is you think, oh, I updated that image. Did it not work? And you're like, oh, it's caching it. Okay. And that is very common why sometimes you hear from developers, but it worked on my machine. It's because typically when we're running in development, we don't have cache. When we're running on the server, we do. Hopefully that answers your question well. Does anyone else have any questions or things that they want to chat about?
Wow, no questions. No questions.
I answered them all.
You've answered them all. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is 9:20. I want to thank Chris for doing. Is there any other recipes you would like to recommend, Chris? Like on your cookbook?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to shout out here. Give me a sec.
You're a chef, aren't you?
I'd say foodie. Yeah, I love food. So it depends. If you're wanting like a true meal, then what I would point out, which is my favorite, is the triple chocolate mousse cake. We just had that for my wife's birthday yesterday, and it is delicious. There's one that's similar that you can get in the grocery store, but this is way better.
That's really good. I have a question.
Yep.
And I'm not really entirely sure how to phrase it, but it's my first time, I guess, having this experience where it's like, so in my, it's not necessarily really related to anything that you've talked about so far. I hope that's okay. But this is my first time from like working with a boot camp where it's a much larger compilation of files with like lots of lines of code. And it's like, do you have any, I guess, recommendations for like when you feel a little bit overwhelmed? Because like, for instance, it's like, I've gotten to a point where I've created a bunch of like functions in JavaScript, but now I have to like remove a bunch and then like just completely reconfigure it all. And it's just kind of like, when I go to look at it, it's just like so much different code that I'm like at the point where I feel like I should just like start from scratch, because it's like there's so many functions that I now have to take out because of what I'm trying to do instead. I'm just wondering, like I've literally had to take a couple days to just be like, okay, I can't even like look at this because it like, I don't know, I guess from
Are you wanting to answer this one, Paul? Is that why you're
not answer it, but I just want maybe a little bit more clarity. What's the goal of the project, or this? Is it a website? Is it?
Yeah, so it's a website that has live information of weather places around the world. So you can literally search any city and it displays like the current temperature, the precipitation, all of that stuff. And the way the boot camp is designed is that essentially each week you do like a challenge, and it incorporates manipulating certain elements to display certain things and integrating different things that you've learned, obviously, from week to week. And it's great, but it's also the point where it's like, I have all these like functions that are saved within it, and it's like, okay, but wait, now I have to like delete that function because that's no longer applicable, because now instead of displaying a temporary inner HTML element as Barrie, it now has to be whatever is the input into the search bar. And it's like
I'm gonna let everyone, all the coders, jump in one at a time if they don't mind.
Okay.
If I was tackling something like that, I would try to chunk it down. There's a tendency when we're coding, and I've found this when I'm tackling any project, is that you're like, oh, I got to change this, but I got to change that, and oh yeah, I got to remember to do this, that, and this, and you start making a framework where I feel like if you remove this brick, the ceiling's going to fall on me. If I move, like, right? So you just want to like chunk it down and just focus on one thing at a time. And I know that seems tedious, but if you can fix just this wall and make it nice and stable, so you're like, okay, I can work on this wall now.
Yeah.
Okay, now that's stable, right?
Okay.
I'm going to let Chris jump in here as far as how his methodology is, and Emilie, and I know Mr. Cook, he probably has a way of doing things. I remember our previous meetings, but that's how I approach things. I found that if you're tackling 20 things at a time, you're going to accomplish none. If you accomplish one thing, there's a high probability you're going to like complete that one task, and then you can move to the other thing. I'll just reference something that you saw this evening. Is Chris, although he was making a quick little website, he actually kind of had a recipe. They had a user story built in for him, and he just kind of went through the user story. The user story said, okay, number one, you need this. And then once he had that, he went to the second point of the user story. So you should be, I always suggest pen and paper, write your user story down, even if it's a sketch here and there, and then just go through your user story. What do they need? Well, I need them to log in first. Okay, I think I got that. Now I need the weather for that region. Okay, I think I got that. That's just my suggestion.
Cool, thank you.
Anybody else?
I'm gonna jump in. So I think for one, there's two different things here. There's the first part, which is, so the term of what you're kind of doing, Steph, is referred to as refactoring, where you already have existing code and you're wanting to make it do something else because it no longer meets what you're needing to do. And I would say that the first thing that you brought up there, where you're like, your first thought is none of this is doing what I need to do, I just need to delete it all and restart, is a very common thing that happens in our field no matter what. Most of the time developers come in, and you actually see this in other industries as well. Ask any contractor to come in your house and they are going to criticize the last contractor that was in your house. You have a plumber that comes in and he goes, whoa, was this guy drunk? Like, that is very common in development. And it's because oftentimes we develop a feature for what we need at that particular time and not what we might need in the future. It's kind of a method of what you have to think about what you're going to be doing in the future. So when we are writing code, if you start feeling like what you're doing is doing multiple things, your code is probably, it's not specific enough. So a good example is, let's say you have a function that is doing a calculation. Let's say it does this. You have a function that does a network call to figure out the current weather, and then it creates all the HTML, and then it updates that HTML, and that's what that entire function does. You might think, oh, that's really self-contained. It does all that stuff. But what if you could split that up and make it so that there's a function that purely grabs the data? You know, you pass in a city, it does the call, and it returns all the data that comes back. And then the next part would then be a function where you give it the data that came back, and it generates the HTML. It doesn't even have to update the DOM. It just generates the HTML, returns that back. Then the next step is then taking that HTML, you pass it into another function. That function then updates the HTML on the page. And then you've broken it down so that these pieces are so small that if you need to refactor something, say you now need to make it so that you're adding precipitation percentage, all you have to do is update the part where you're generating the HTML, and everything else benefits. So partially, as Paul was saying, you know, like if you have this list in your head of how to break it down, but if you simplify what things are doing, it often gets easier for refactoring. But at the same time, I'm working in a code base with, I'm going to guess, thousands of files, tens of thousands of files. And I had to work across, I think I had 27 files open on my computer today.
Oh my gosh.
And honestly, it is overwhelming. And I've expressed concern at some things that are in the code base to my coworkers. And they're like, yeah, we've been meaning to get to that. And that's just kind of how it is. You unfortunately always step into a code base that is never pretty. It can always be better. And that's the thing, is at the end of the day, like, code can always, for the most part, be better.
Awesome.
If code is perfect, it means that the requirements never change, and requirements always change in the real world. How many screens do I have? I have 3. Well, I guess 4 if you can count the laptop.
And thank you. I didn't think about like simplifying it to like that simple, and I think that'll help me when I go back to look at it tomorrow. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I just say, like, I just wanted to say though, is like, this is the main thing, is everyone always has those feelings because you might feel overwhelmed with it all just being in one file. And sometimes you'll end up breaking it out. And this is what I said, like you might have a function that handles all these different use cases, but you're like, there's so much code in here. And then you'll break it into 2 files. But now you have to do the mental gymnastics of knowing what's in the 2 files and try to like get them to work together. And sometimes you make it easy on yourself and sometimes you make it harder. But at the end of the day, like this is honestly just being a developer. You just always feel like this.
Are you saying that sometimes there's like things that you work with would be like multiple JavaScript files?
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, like that's what I was referring to, the thousands of files in a code base.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, that opens up the whole discussion, monolith versus microservices too. But I don't want to throw jargon out there. But yeah, there's 100 ways to skin a cat. Is it? Oh, look at the puppy.
That's a good question.
That was a great question. If anyone has a scratcher like that, that would be awesome. I actually have a question. Do you guys listen to music when you code or mess around?
Yep.
Yeah.
What kind?
All of them.
You want to go ahead, Chris?
That's it.
All of them.
I have a specific song. I don't know if you guys know that group. It's called Placebo. Soulmates Never Die. And the reason is it's the only song I would listen to that would help me work, or which like I don't care about the lyrics, otherwise I would be singing along and not focusing. But yeah, that's a good thing as well. Like I saw instrumental. I think songs without lyrics help as well. I don't know about you guys.
I would say the one thing that I found the most distracting, and this might not be true to everyone, but it's instrumental music to music that you know.
Oh.
Because
Yes.
what I found is I started like singing the lyrics in my
In
head
your
to the
head.
instrumental song that I know. So I don't know. I find that it kind of depends on what type of work I'm doing. If I'm doing something that's kind of brainless, I don't have a problem listening to, lyrical music. But I think like lo-fi is typically like a common thing that you'll see. But I also found myself like listening to metal, even sometimes would just get me in the zone. That's why I said I listen to like everything. I just throw on Spotify, and if I'm not feeling it, I'll switch a playlist if I skip, 3-4 songs in a row.
It's good to know. Okay. I was trying to describe my music taste to people and they were like, isn't that distracting? I was like, no, I feel like it occupies a part of my brain so I can just focus on what I'm doing. It's interesting. I like to throw that one out just in case.
Someone else I know tends to watch, well, have running in the background like shows he's watched before, right? Not something new, just something that's familiar.
That I can't do. That person's a psychopath. No, I'm joking, but
well, maybe.
I used to watch.
I've enjoyed on occasion the music for programming at Net. There's a
I saw that link there.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be that non-distinct background music.
I've even heard of there are websites where it'll put in office chatter for you, so that way people who are used to like working in an office that kind of has like background noise that you can kind of make out but not fully understand what it's saying. And I think again, everyone's a different type of learner, or not learner, but like everyone has a different way of working, right? So some people, like I'll sometimes just be coding in silence. Other times I just have loud music going. I know that I had a lot less music playing here when my wife was working from home, but now that she's back in school, I'll like throw the speakers on and just blare it. It depends on what I'm doing.
Has anyone tried programming to that ASMR stuff?
Oh, but I've heard about it.
Have anyone tried blind coding?
Mm.
It's
No.
like like when you code, we tend to go to the browser to see if it works or not. Coding blindly is just coding without going into the browser. So you have to actually, like, you don't, how would I say that? Let's say you say an H1 and then you give it a style of red. You can't go into the browser to see if it's actually red. Like you need to, or you say like float or flex center. You don't know if it's center or not. Once you finish coding it, then you see if it's okay or not. And it's a challenge that some people do among themselves, like a blind coding.
I think there's a certain part of that that is common. I wouldn't necessarily say, like, I would always say, like, don't limit yourself. I mean, like, there's the part where you're doing it for fun, but especially if you're working at a place, like, use the tools that you have to take advantage. Like, there's people who limit themselves to using, say, Vim or whatever set of tools that they have. And I'm like, use whatever makes your life easier. However, when you're doing stuff like test-driven development, for example, is, I would almost argue, as a way of blind coding, because you write tests before you start writing code, but you can test certain things that aren't visually done. So an example in JavaScript that we would do is, let's say I click a button and a modal pops up. So I would write a test that would be loading the page, clicking the button, and then I check if the modal is open. And technically, you know, like it's the computer looking for it, but you can write those tests without visually looking at it and be able to check, you know, does an element by this ID exist, or does an element with this class name exist? And you can essentially test that your code is functioning without having opened the browser once.
I am fascinated by that concept of test-driven development. I've tried to do a few tutorials. There was one called Obey the Testing Goat. And I think it's obeythetestinggoat.com if you guys want to check it out. I'll see if I can.
I would also say, like, true test-driven development, which is where you write the test before you write the code, I think is idealistic. I think there are some cases where you can do it, but oftentimes I will write the test after I write the code.
And I guess that was going to be my next question, because in concept it sounds great, but I do see a lot of that. I see a lot of people. If anyone's interested in getting into open source projects, because it can be kind of intimidating to get your foot in the door if you want to contribute to some of these projects you see on GitHub. Chris referenced like Facebook using React. It would be kind of intimidating to contribute, but the truth is you can contribute to any open source code project out there. And one of the ways you can get your foot in the door is they're always looking for people to help out with documentation, and they're always looking for people to help out make tests. And I found that out with a lot of projects is they've written the code, but they don't have any tests. And so they're looking for volunteers to write oodles and oodles of tests so that they, can assure that their code always works in the future as they refactor and change things. But definitely an area I need to practice on. And blind coding, that just sounds fun. That sounds like Russian roulette for programming. I hope
I
they
just
do
figured
that.
programming can be hard enough with looking at it, let alone not looking at it. Although I've written code that I don't want to look at, so I think
There you
maybe
go.
there's something there. Yeah, to go off on that some more, tests are definitely something that is really useful to have, and not every place has, like, I mean, it's idealistic to think that you're going to have 100% test coverage, but what people will do oftentimes is if you have a bug in the code base, so this is the common example, when I do X, Y happens, or when I do X, Y doesn't happen. And those are the perfect times to write tests, because under those specific conditions, you can write a test that tests it. So on a simple level, you could say, let's say you have a function that adds two numbers, and for whatever reason, when you give it 7 and 9, it doesn't give you a result of 16, it gives you 17 for whatever reason. So you could write a test that does that. So when I give this function 7 and 9, it returns 16. And you know in the future that that function is always going to work at least for that use case, you know. In some other things though, like, I mean, testing a function that adds 2 numbers, probably not necessary, but you can extrapolate off of that where, you know, when I give it these exact parameters, this expected output happens. And that partially comes down to the way that we write code. Like functional programming is very big on not having side effects and things having, again, expected input, expected output, or pure functions.
Sorry, I was typing something. I was listening, I promise.
No worries. You're not the only one here, Paul.
Oh gosh. I feel like I have to respond. Like I'm co-hosting here. Listen, I was gonna set up another poll, but maybe everyone could just save me some time and comment in the chat, or just unmute yourself and let me know. Would everyone be interested? I hope you had fun this evening. Would you be interested in this on a bi-weekly schedule, or would you like this like once a month and a kind of deal? I'm just trying to read the room here. You can throw it in the chat. You can yell out. Once a month is enough Zoom I can handle, Paul, or okay, monthly for Chris. That's a strong vote there. Everybody else, is monthly good? Okay, let's stick with monthly. I know we get zoomed out, and you'll get this. You'll get sick of me real quick. I promise you that. Same as we go test and try.
Honestly, this is my thought, is if there's kind of 2 aspects to it, right? Like if we do it too often, people potentially could get burnt out. But of course, all these meetings are optional, so you don't have to show up month or bi-weekly. You could still show up monthly. But at the same time, like if you do it too often, you know, like you want to build anticipation, right? Like, oh, we're getting to the end of the month. There's going to be the freeCodeCamp. And I think that there would probably be a larger turnout if it was monthly. That's just my thought.
All right. I think we'll stick with the original plan, which is monthly.
We could always change it too. If all of a sudden people say, hey, I want to do this bi-weekly next month, then we do it.
Yeah, just meet the demand. We're asking for the goods. Okay. I'm just going to ask another question. Maybe we could take this offline. COVID not cited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the restrictions lifting as well.
Yeah, I second that as well. What would you guys like to learn next month? We do have a GitHub set up for our club here. Let's see if I can refresh it here. So if you guys go to github.com/freeCodeCamp Barrie, I'm just gonna put in the chat real quick here. But in there, we're gonna put our Arduino. Yes. Music to my ears. Yeah, I would love to talk about that. I actually just started getting into that, so we can do a few workshops on getting that all sorted out. Okay, so yeah, I want everyone to at least get yourself a GitHub account and push some pull requests on our GitHub repository. We'll try to set up an agenda for next meeting, and if you don't like what we're suggesting, maybe we're going to make a kitten app. You don't want anything to do with cats, you get to say no. Arduino. I do want to make sure that we cover the bases and we kind of stick to freeCodeCamp, but if we have to rebrand ourselves as just a North OT Meetup online, I'm happy with that as well. It is.
Yeah. The only thing that, and I'm not shutting it down, my only thought was that I think there is an Arduino simulator, but just for those of us that don't have an Arduino or another microcontroller. Okay. It might not necessarily be as accessible, but I think it's something that we.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking like we could do like a knowledge sharing, like a demo of it. It doesn't necessarily have to be the main thing of it either.
I was going to say there's Tinkercad that is free, and you can log in, and you'll have an Arduino board and a breadboard. I think that's how it's called. And you have like the bulb and all these things that you can do. And on the side, if you want to code it with, I have never ever done Java in my life, but there's different way of you can like code it and make the bulb light and all these kinds of jazz. If ever you don't have the kit, and you can share as well. So I don't know. It's just a suggestion that I'm throwing out there.
Yeah, and I just want to put this out to anyone that's listening. If you have a project you want to showcase and do show and tell, that's what we were doing in our original meetups. We'd spend a few minutes just kind of showing off what we were working on, or to kind of ask a few questions of everybody, and then we'd jump into a coding challenge. So if you want to do a mini presentation at our next meeting, other than Arduino, more than happy to share the speaking stage. I want to thank Chris again for doing the lion's share this evening. I learned a ton. I'm also glad we got a recording of this. I'm going to make that available on YouTube or Google Drive ASAP once it's processed and available. So for those that kind of tuned out, or if you whatever, that's okay. You can slow it down and go step by step. We have like 15 minutes on the clock, but if you guys are all tapped out, we can wrap up early. What are your thoughts?
Someone's asking, what's the YouTube channel?
The YouTube channel, I haven't invented it yet. So what I'll do is I'll put it in the Arduino. The Arduino. Now I'm starting to fade here.
Facebook group.
Facebook group. I'll also put it on our GitHub repo.
The other thing, can I actually do like a quick shout out thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for those of you that maybe are not a part of it, Paul had mentioned at the beginning of this, but not everyone was here. So I run a tech meetup that's in the Barrie area, well, pre-COVID, that was called North OT. I'm going to throw the link in the chat. One of the things that we have is a Slack group where people kind of in the Barrie area can, chat. There's not really a whole lot that happens, but whenever I see something that's local, I try to throw like, there's a jobs channel that isn't super busy. But again, what we could do is if we want to make it more active, we can utilize the North OT Slack as kind of like a hub for all things that are kind of tech around Barrie, and people can join that in order to share the link to YouTube also when it's posted, if that's something that you want to do, Paul.
Yeah, can you, while I yammer on here, can you find the link for that channel or for your...
Yeah, I shared the link to North OT on there. You'll see in the right-hand menu is the Slack icon. If you just click on the Slack icon, it will open up to being able to register.
Perfect, too easy, okay. Yeah, and I remember some news being posted on a regular basis by Chris on the Slack channel. And if you need to ask him a question immediately and he's not listening to music and working for his Utah company, then maybe he'll be kind enough to address it, or at least remember it for our next meeting. Yeah, and pizza. He always had pizza at his meetups. That was awesome. And they were well organized. So I really appreciate Chris for...
I had no idea how. I just made it up as I went. I think what was super overwhelming, not to like keep talking about it, but it was the time that I think we had like 65 people show up.
It was a packed house. It was a packed house. I was like, my God, it's turned into a TED event here. This is amazing.
We had to steal chairs from the classroom next to us.
It was really impressive. And the speakers you had lined up, yeah. Well, everybody, I think I might wrap it up early. It is Friday evening. I want to thank everyone for showing up. This was an excellent turnout. I was telling my wife, I said, if one person shows up, that'll be good. But this was remarkable. So thank you, everyone, for not only tuning in, but sticking around and your excellent questions, challenging Chris to the limits. And yeah, any comments at the end there, Chris, Emily?
Thanks for having me. That's it. I threw my LinkedIn. If anyone wants to connect and shoot me a message, I can also just be connected on Slack. If anyone has any questions, either stuff to work on or whatever, just shoot me a message. I'm pretty good at getting back.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Emily, for doing
No
the Zoom moderating. I appreciate it, and thank you all of you for not Zoom bombing. I really appreciate that too. We'll post lots of information for the next meetup. Everybody, please stay safe. I expect to see you all back if possible. Otherwise, yeah, be well.
Sounds good.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.